Killer. The Return of Jeffrey Woods. An original piece of fiction by Steve Gray. Installment 2. The deed was done. The task was complete, and Jeff's bloodlust was satiated. His heavily perspiring frame stood straddling the gory wreckage of Randy's body. The steam emitting from the beaten and exenerated corpse rose upward, mingling with the heavy breaths coming from Jeff. Randy's ribcage was visible along with lightly quivering innards in the glow of the yellowish streetlight. All remained quiet. Nothing could be heard, aside from the distant barking of a dog about a block away. Even the crickets were quiet. Jeff stood there. He grinned and was wide-eyed. He gripped the garden gnome tightly, the crude weapon that it had now become. It's a certainty that the company that made it, Camp for Masonry in Scottsdale, Arizona, had no intention for such a gleeful, grinning creation such as this to have been used in such a horrifying way. Nevertheless, what was done was done. Jeff's wide, exaggerated grin stayed solid as he stared down at the corpse. The blood and bits of flesh that were now fixed on his face, his hands, and the gnome itself was coagulating. "I got you. I got you, you motherfucker," Jeff croaked. "Just like I said I would. I'm gonna get all of you. Every damn last one of you. I can't live without this feeling now. I love it." He slowly leaned downward, fixing a concentrated gaze at Randy's face, as if he were a teacher trying to confirm that a student was understanding an explanation of a lesson. "Do you hear me? Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He stared down at Randy. Randy's face was in a frozen expression that Jeff thought reminded him of films that he had watched in school. Films of the Holocaust. All those dead Jews. The faces on those dead bodies in the films were what Randy's resembled now. Eyes looking east and west, mouth wide open, ribbons of his own blood adorning his face. "I heard you, Jeff." Jeff's eyebrows raised slightly. Randy's lips hadn't moved, but Jeff still heard his voice. "Good. That's good, bitch. You better have heard me. And anyway, you're off your rocker, talking to me after I've wasted you, so shut up." Jeffrey Woods took the tip of the bloodied gnome's hat and placed it under Randy's chin, and with a quick and forceful thrust, but not too forceful, closed Randy's mouth. He then stood straight and turned to leave the scene. He crossed the street and made his way through an open field, and then proceeded through the wooded area that he had come from. He still held a tight grip on the gnome as if he were gripping a dagger or an axe. The crickets proceeded with their night songs. The next morning, the sun had risen in its full glory. The birds chirped, and the beads of dew clung steadfast to the blades of grass. The air had a slight and pleasant coolness to it, as well as a light breeze. Inside the lonely room, the stale odor of whiskey lingered, and several spent cigarette butts were piled high in an ashtray sitting next to the empty scotch bottle. Sun rays that were shining through the cracks of the closed mini-blinds cast a light deflection on the barrel of the pistol that was also sitting on the table. Such an air of depression in this room. An encumbered feeling. Monica still sat in her recliner, sleeping. And after a short while, as the morning continued, she darted up instantly. Her large eyes gazed directly at the clock. 10:03 a.m. "Late! Damn it!" she said. "Oh, my head." She placed her index fingers on her temples and rotated a massage in an effort to put out the fire in her brain. She closed her eyes against the pain of the morning sun. "Oh, God, I've got to get up," she muttered. "Why in hell do I do this to myself, Jesus?" She reached for her cell phone, which was nearly dead because she neglected to charge it last night. 10 missed calls, seriously, people. Oh, her head was spinning, and she wasn't sure she knew how she was going to get through this day. After some quick personal prep and a couple of squirts from her pocket breath freshener, she started out the door to take hold of the flame, so to speak. By the time she got on the road, traffic was already very thick in some spots in town. After all, that's what happens when the morning gets later and the roadways get congested with people and vehicles in more awake states of being. With the AC in her car blasting out its maximum, she sat in traffic. The stop and go wasn't something she enjoyed, as most people don't. She flipped on the stereo and after a little fiddling with stations couldn't settle on one, so she stopped on a station where a news report was in progress. Police are baffled by the apparent brutality of this crime, the voice on the radio said. People are being asked to remain indoors or in groups until a suspect can be apprehended. A police spokesperson says that with conditions being as they are in this matter, if you're seen alone after dark or in plain sight, you're either a suspect or a victim. It is urged that all citizens in the area follow the advice of the police and stay indoors with windows and doors locked and working alarm systems engaged. The voice on the radio trailed off as Monica's mind began to wander once again. She saw Rosenberg. The memory, just as crystal clear now as it had always been. She inched forward little by little toward the traffic light and was imagining the unimaginable. The voice on the radio continued for a brief minute more, explaining the news of an immensely brutal slaying that had taken place the night prior. It was him. She just knew it. The cops know it too, she thought. Things have been quiet for nearly 5 years since his last murder. Jeff, she muttered inaudibly to herself. Why now? Thick color was rising in her cheeks and something clicked in the back of her throat. She remembered her pistol and realized that she'd left it laying right where it was now, on her coffee table. Fine lot of good that's doing you now, girlio. She shook her head. Her bout with traffic continued for about another 45 minutes, and when she arrived at work, she was instantly approached by her coworker, Jessica Chambliss. Oh my God, Monica, are you okay? You look terrible. Yeah, thanks. Rough night. How's the coffee this morning? Jessica threw an okay hand gesture up as she spoke. Did you hear about the murder? Yep, just heard it on the radio on the way in a little while ago. Jerry had his police scanner on last night? Jessica was speaking of her boyfriend. It was horrible. They were saying that whoever killed this person must have been in a rage because they beat the person to oatmeal. Monica felt a heave in her stomach and yet once again saw Rosenberg, only in this memory he wasn't looking upward. He was staring right at her. Don't let this happen again, Monica, he said. His voice was dry and quiet, much like that of a person getting over a respiratory infection. Ants were crawling all over his face, in and out of his nostrils. They began feeding on his dead flesh. Please, please, he moaned. His eyes slowly rolled upward in their sockets. His tongue, swollen and purple, lulled out of his mouth. He grinned at her. Right, Monica? Jessica said frantically, grabbing at Monica's arm. What? I said, are you all right? My God, Monica, you're as white as a sheet. You're scaring me. Here, sit down, honey. She helped Monica to her desk and helped her to sit down. Maybe you should go home. You do not look well. I'll be okay. Can you just please get me some coffee? Jessica nodded and started for the break room. As Monica watched her step out of sight around the corner, her vision blurred slightly. I can't let this go on, she thought. Her head seemed to be pounding worse than it had been since she'd woke up. I'm gonna lose my fucking mind. That's all there is to it. It's him, I know it is. She had never had such a feeling of certainty about something like she was having about this. I've got to get to him before the cops do. But what? What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? She began cultivating an idea. Perspiration was forming beads on her forehead. The room was spinning slightly. She was ideating the pistol. You know, kids, the one that was sitting on the coffee table next to an empty liquor bottle and a mountain of cigarette butts. the one that should be securely placed in her purse. Is this a fight she could handle? Let's think about this for a minute. She was sitting there at her desk, mind racing, pulse racing, room spinning, head pounding. Was she truly thinking clearly, is this a fight she can handle? Remembering the newspaper clippings, the broadcasts, and everything she's ever heard about this Jeff creature and the results of his violence. Then she thought of, you guessed it, gang, Rosenberg. And the way he looked. God, how awful. This was no ordinary psychopath. He made most others look like choir boys in comparison. Hell, he even made that guy with the leather face look like a serious pussy. So how, pray, was she going to handle this nutso plan to intercept this monster before the police got to him? This is going to require a bit more planning, she thought, and a bit more whiskey, to be sure. She reluctantly continued her day at work, and by quitting time was feeling quite a bit better. Tired, but a lot better. When she made her way home, she, of course, stopped by the liquor store to get her provisions, as it were. It was going to be a night of pondering upon some unpleasant subject matter, careful planning. But she was adamant. She wouldn't be able to stomach the thoughts and dreams much longer. One way or another, they were going to die, and they were going to be buried for good. And so was he. For good. That night, after a day of laying extremely low in secluded digs, Jeff was slowly tottering through the wooded area that had been so familiar to him. He had managed to elude capture for nearly 5 years, and some might say, due to some form of unholy kismet. He shambled through the moistened earth of the woods. Stout trees stretched out branches and limbs overhead that looked like skeletal fingers in threatening claw-like positions, ready to rip apart an unsuspecting victim. There was a light breeze that moved through the area, chilling the air assiduously. Dried leaves moved across the ground, and the crackling sound they made as they moved resembled the sound of a steady fire. Nearly 5 years. How did he do it? It wasn't easy, people, he might say. He survived. That was the overall point. Inhumanly diligent, living off the land, animals, vegetation. Living off of whatever scraps were thrown into the dumpster behind the pizza restaurant after closing. That was where he was going now. Highly sensitive to any law enforcement that was scouring the area, and there was a lot. He was shuffling toward the opening of the tree line, and on the outside of the wooded area, just across a not-so-busy street, was the backside of a retail plaza. He spent time there. It felt safe enough. This is a place he frequented among many, contemplating his methodology, his modus operandi, with the patience of a saint and the fury of a storm. Last night, he had made his first move. It had been a while since he had swam in the goodness of the Iker, and he was high from it. But just like with every high, he was going to come down and would need another fix. This last one was special, though. It really meant something to Jeff. Randy, that cocksucker. He had hated him ever since he had gotten here. He had put an end to him in grand style. Jeff was in the back of the dumpster now, and sat down on a cinder block that had been sat up vertically. He then realized he was still holding on to the garden gnome. He turned the gnome to face him, and its squinty grin was fixed. It held its pipe in its mouth, and was cracked and caked with dried blood and gut matter. Jeff gave a quick grin, and sat the gnome down. He stared at it. He looked around and regarded the area. He was actually tired. He was going to have to rest. Yes, the Randy job took a lot out of him, surely. A particularly intricate work of hellish art that was, he thought. Yes, just as he deserved. He did him in true grand fashion. Yeah, you did. Jeff jumped, ready to strike out and slay anyone who was close. But no one was around. You really fucked him up, I'd say. Who are you thinking is next? The voice inquired, sounding eerily cheerful. Where are you, asshole? Come out where I can see you, Jeff aggressively whispered.
I'm right here, in front of you. Look.
Jeff turned his gaze toward the garden gnome, and its grin was still fixed and was unmoved.
Eureka!
Jeff heard the voice, but the gnome stayed inanimate.
I ask again, who are you going to do next?
Jeff didn't answer, but continued to keep his glare pasted on the gnome. His already fractured mind was trying desperately to understand how and why this gnome was communicating with him. This was indeed something new. Installment 3 coming soon. Please like and share to get updated when the next installment becomes available, as well as other videos posted to this channel, and thank you very much for your support.